everybody, this is going to be video number 2 in the series of cakes. The first, by now, hopefully you've all done, and you've gotten good practice with your piping skills, your writing, and perhaps your making of roses as well. We're now going to be producing the cake itself and just showing you a little bit about that. I broke it down here to the 2 main types of cakes that there are. With regard to cakes, we have the high fat or the creamed fats, and those are going to include butter cakes, high ratio cakes, and creamed cakes, and they include pound cakes, layer cakes, coffee cakes, and yes, even brownies. And the other type of cake are the egg foam cakes. They're much softer and lighter in texture. They're not suitable, as you could see, to learn how to ice the cakes, and these include the genoise, sponge cakes, angel cakes, and chiffon cakes. Those cakes, because they're much lighter in texture, they're going to be much more difficult for you to ice with a spatula in practicing. So I'm going to ask that for this lesson that you're all going to make some kind of creamed fat cake. The pound cake tends to be the most stable, easiest to make, and since we've already worked with the creaming method, we're going to be well versed on that. So I'm going to make a big batch of cake now. I'm going to show you how to mix it. I am going to show you how to bake it, to tell when it's done, to pull them out of the oven, and what to do with them once they come out of the oven. Okay, in this recipe here, although it is a pound cake, and typically the creaming method will tell you to cream, of course, the sugar along with the fat, in this recipe, we're going to work it a little bit differently. It's asking you to mix the dry ingredients first. Once you mix the dry ingredients together, then we will add the fat. So it's going to combine all of the dry ingredients, not just your sugar and your fat. We're always going to start the mixer, make sure it's on speed 1, and we're going to turn it on nice and gently just to spin it around, not kicking up the flour all over the place. Again, anytime we're scraping bowls or anything along those lines, we always want to make sure that we lower the speed of the mixer before we go back on. So we have our dry ingredients here. In a minute we'll start filming again where we're going to add the fat to it, and then at the end we will add all of our liquids slowly. Okay, just finished scraping the bowl, and now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure our speed is down to speed 1 again, and we can slowly start to add our liquids. In this recipe we have our eggs mixed with some vanilla and our milk, and we're going to alternate that back and forth, making sure we stop the bowl every couple minutes to scrape down to the bottom. Okay, so now we have our fat in there with our flour. Again, I'm going to make sure my speed is on the correct speed. If we have large amounts in the mixer, we'll do it on little stages by turning the mixer on and off. We're going to give that a couple minutes to mix, and then I'll come back with a bowl scraper. I'm going to scrape down just like we have in the past, down to the bottom, covering that space between the paddle and the mixing bowl. Okay, the next card we're going to talk about is greasing or spraying the pans. Many of the egg foam cakes do not require greasing the pans, and to please follow the recipes very carefully. You'll find that many of the egg foam recipes are going to be doing something where they need this side of the pan to not be greased, and they're going to kind of crawl up the sides. Today's cake, however, being that it's a pound cake, we are going to grease it. We're going to grease all the sides and the bottom, and when we start our mix, we're going to use a scale to figure out how much batter to put into each cake mix. The purpose of the scale is so that each cake comes out exactly the same. It's a little bit easier than using a volumetric measurement. We just use the scale, and then we can line up all of our pans going into the oven. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to be putting the cakes into the oven. I will probably just show you having the cake come out of the oven and how to tell when it's done, so you don't have to watch the whole procedure that we've already seen once before. Alright, to check the doneness in the cakes, we have 2 methods. The first one's going to be pressing them down in the center, and the second one's going to be verifying with a toothpick or a skewer if you don't have one. So this cake just came out of the oven. Taking a look at the cake, you'll always find that the centers are going to bake more slowly than the rest of the cake. We talked about this a little bit with cheesecake, how the heat tends to hit the sides of the pan. So knowing that, we're not so worried about the edges where they're going to brown first. We're more worried about the center and that they're going to spring back, which that one does just beautifully. If you're not sure by springing back, in other words, you're pushing down on the cake, it's going to go down and then it's going to spring back up. And then down and spring back up. If you were to just push it down and it stays down, that means the center is not cooked all the way. Again, if you're not 100% sure, just put a skewer or a toothpick in there and you'll see if it comes out dry, no liquid on it, the cake is done. Okay, when the cake comes out of the oven, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to invert it. Always invert the cake when cooling. We always invert the cake when cooling so that when we can get the cake out, that is hot, we're going to have two flat sides to the cake. Think about this. This is the bottom. It's always flat. Now the top is going to be flat also. It's one less step in having to trim the cake and cutting it. The cake's going to then get put away somewhere. I would suggest when the cake gets cooled, you can put it on a rack or not. When it's done, you're going to take the cake, you're going to wrap it in saran wrap and either refrigerate it or freeze it. You're going to refrigerate it or freeze it so that the cake and any of the shortening or butter that it has in the recipe hardens up nicely, because that's going to be the whole secret to icing the cakes properly. Sorry about the bell. We're always going to have the cake nice and chilled, and the icing will be at room temperature and spreadable and soft. So at this point, you can cool down the cake, you can wrap it in saran wrap, and you can put it in your freezer, or you can throw it in your refrigerator to get all of the fat in there nice and solid, so that we're going to be ready to do the third and final stage in the cakes, which is assembling and icing the cakes.